All right, everybody. Welcome to Defend Your Wellness, which is the third in a three-part series of expert panels that I'm hosting. We've got a live audience here, so welcome to the live audience who are joining in. I'm excited to share this conversation with you with these amazing experts who we will have. They'll introduce themselves here in just a second. But just a quick admin note for all y'all who are here in the live audience. We want you to be a part of this. We would love for you to ask us questions. You can do that either in the chat on your screen, and I believe there's some option on there where you could actually ask a question via live video. I have never actually been in the audience portion of this software, so I just have read in the FAQs that that's something that you can do. So hopefully you can see it. And yeah, we're going to get this thing started. This is a topic that I'm extremely excited about. I called it Defend Your Wellness because 26 years of helping people with their health and their fitness and their well-being, I've really realized that one of the most major issues is somewhat of their social environment and what's going on in their life. You know, we often hear people make the excuse that like, oh, my job got in the way, or my family got in the way, or, you know, insert, you know, and these are very good reasons. So these are all very good reasons why people might put their wellness and health on the side. But we, of course, as experts, want you to put yourself first and to be the most well and healthy person that you can possibly be. So we want to toss this subject around with these experts and get their take on you know, how people can move forward in those topics. So what we're going to do first is we're going to start with some introductions. So for my panelists, I would love for you to just introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about what you do for a living. Tell us where you are geographically, because we're all spread all over the country, and actually all of North America, including one of our panelists here. So yeah, just tell us a little bit about yourself. Give us the elevator speech. So I'm going to start with Taryn. You're on the top of my screen. How are you doing?
What's up? I'm hyped to be here. My name is Taryn Dubriel. I own a company called Perfect Day Business Mentorship. I mentor small service-based business owners to help them earn more, work less, and kind of get towards whatever their perfect day is. I was a CrossFit gym owner for 15 years, and this is kind of taking my path, and I'm just working on moving my life from Canada, where I am right now, into Arizona, because who likes the cold Canadian winters? Not I.
That's awesome. Well, I'm so excited to have you on the panel. Thank you for being here. Jen, you're next.
I'm Jen Patterson. I'm also stoked to be here. I'm in Austin, Texas, where it's not cold. I guess I kind of call myself a mental health coach. It's really guidance, right? Everybody does their own work. And I use something called internal family systems and inquiry, which both help a person really get to know how their inner psyche works and what's driving what kind of our underlying beliefs about ourselves and how that makes us show up in the world. And if we want to show up a little differently, how to change kind of what's the underlying those beliefs driving stuff. So yeah, and I'm also a longtime CrossFitter and out, as we were just saying, in week 7 of Achilles rupture, but here we are. Plugging through.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad you hobbled your way onto the show today, and I'm excited to have a conversation with you. Isabel, you're next on my screen. Could you please introduce yourself? Welcome.
Yes. Hi. Thanks for having me. I am here in Bastrop, Texas, where Ethan is, and I'm a doctor of acupuncture and herbal medicine, as well as a coach. And my whole goal is to help people function in their life the way they want to or haven't been able to because of physical or emotional pain. And I am a CrossFitter as of 1 year because of Ethan. And yeah, happy to be here. Thanks.
Awesome. Welcome. Thank you for being here. Eric, you're next on my screen. Welcome, and introduce yourself, please.
What's up, guys? Eric Freedom from Southern California. 36 years old. This will be interesting to add on. I'm a son of first-generation immigrants. that's kind of impacted my story a little bit, and I'll share a little bit about that later. But SoCal native, founded the gym about 11 years ago, coaching for 15 years, and kind of shifting towards coaching mental performance and executive coaching. So that's me.
Awesome. Thank you for being here. And last but not least, Joel, welcome, and please introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Joel Sherman. I'm a head coach at a CrossFit gym in Virginia. It's sometimes cold and it's sometimes hot, and it's usually in between. But yeah, save the best for last. That's probably not true. I feel like I'm probably the least qualified to be on here, but I have a podcast. It's called Good People. It's a self-improvement podcast. I've had Jen on. I've had Ethan on a number of times. I've done a couple ultra marathons. I'm a jiu-jitsu athlete. I feel like I am a good advocate of like kind of doing a lot of things at a pretty okay level, and I think that anybody listening probably can take a lot from that, because I think we have a lot of stuff that is going on in our lives professionally usually, and that's the main focus, and it's hard to fit the health and fitness stuff into it, and I think I have a pretty good perspective on that.
Awesome. Well, I invited all of you here because I know you have a great perspective on life and you have amazing experience. So let's dive into it, shall we? I really want to. I'm going to lob a softball to you all. The topic of this panel is defend your wellness, and I'm really curious when you hear the term defend your wellness, you guys might be thinking about the population of people that you work with and all these different things. What comes to mind for you? Like what? Okay, I guess defend from what? You can take this a lot of different ways, but I welcome any of y'all to jump in and talk about what you think there.
Yeah, I could take this actually, because I was actually giving a lot of thought to it in the weeks leading up to this, and the thing that kept coming to mind for me was, I think that we'll get on here and we'll end up probably talking a lot about the how, like how to fit it into a busy schedule, how to do this, how to do that, and I actually think that that's probably not very important. There's thousands of methods to improve your wellness, improve your health, whether it's fitness or mental or spiritual. Literally, you name it. Like, there's so many ways that you can improve yourself. And I think all of us are on here because we know that the why is the most important. And I don't mean why as in, like, what's your why, what's your purpose? I think it's even, like, more basic and surface level than that. And I just have a fundamental belief, and I would assume a lot of us do here, that in order to help other people, you have to help yourself. And it's important to take care of yourself. Like, Ethan, I know one of your tenets is optimal health, and that looks different for every single person. Like, if you're a professional athlete, your health is going to look a little bit different than if you're an artist or a business owner or whatever. But I think at a fundamental level, in order to take care of other people and in order to interface with the world in the best possible way, it's super important to make sure that you're okay mentally and physically, and taking care of that first is an excellent place to start.
I love that. That's an awesome perspective. Does anybody else think anything? Anybody else have a different thought about defending your wellness? Hey, go ahead and jump in, Jen.
For me, the defend brings up the idea of like a bad guy. Like you said, who are we defending from? So I like to pose the question of, what if there isn't one? Like, how would you show up differently? When we're fighting against something, we're potentially like in that victim triangle of like victim, persecutor, rescue. Even with illness, right? There's something out there that you're going to get sick from. There's like an idea that we can potentially reframe.
I love that. Yeah. And I hope that we'll bring that more into the conversation, because I think that is an interesting perspective.
Sure.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah, jump in, Isabel.
Jen, I love that. And I was along a similar line. And when I saw defend your wellness, my mind immediately went, oh, this seems like a very like masculine approach. I mean, like divine masculine, not like boy, girl. I'm not gendering it. And I was like, what if it was just allow your wellness? And how are we, allowing that to happen? And my mind went down this whole trail too, when it comes to like some of the topics we want to get into today, discipline at the top of that list, and how there are so many approaches to it, and so many of them are very masculine in approach, and how we need to have the feminine in it as well. And so I was really hoping that today we could get into some of that as well, and we'll just see where it flows. But yeah, when I heard defend your wellness, I thought, well, what if we also allow it? And there's not really, the bad guy, or there's not really the it's like this motion. It's like when I hear defend, it's like we're on something, we're watching for something. What if it was just receiving what you need? So we'll see where it goes. But that's what I was thinking.
Okay, awesome.
I think a lot of it has to do with context of like where you're coming from too, right? Like Eric and I and Ethan and arguably Joel too, is like the type of people that we dealt with and talk to and come in to work with us on a day-to-day basis are always coming from that defensive position anyways, right? Like it's always an onslaught of everything else, whether it's external or internal. And then they were coming to us to try and like, hey, I got to put a stop to all of these other things. And so I completely love and respect your both of your approaches. But I sit here and I'm like, actually, like my most exposure to it has always been trying to help people like just hang on. I got to stop and look after myself. Like everybody back up is the kind of attitude. And I think that just comes back to the context that you live within that every day, right?
Yeah, I'm going to add to that too. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, please do. I was just going to ask you what your thoughts were.
Yeah, just I think the narrative, it really goes back to narrative, right? And I think in my experience, a lot of people that I've worked with over the years, if I'm looking at like this is very masculine, but in terms of like war, right? I'm thinking of a lot of people that are coming to me. They're not like, hey, I'm getting ready to go to war. They're coming with me to like with ripped clothes, and like they've been in the battlefield, and they're like, dude, I don't know how to take care of myself because I'm constantly at war with myself and the external world around me, and life is so fast, and life feels like a battlefield, and I'm just trying not to step on. I'm just trying not to step on the next landmine. So I see where the defense comes from, but yeah, I definitely see both perspectives.
Yeah, I love already where this conversation is going because I have all these different perspectives within me, and I've learned from a lot of different folks, different ways to kind of look at this. And I think the reason why I chose defend your wellness was really a little sneaky, because we often a lot of people I work with tend to point the finger and point blame at things external to them, when actuality what I'm always conscious of for myself is that I have to protect myself from myself in some ways, that I'm kind of creating issues that are really the bigger problem. And when I can set good boundaries and have the right conversations with people, things go a lot better for me. So
has anybody in here ever seen Avatar: The Last Airbender?
I haven't.
It's an animated kids show that I watched when I was growing up. And the reason why I bring this up is because the whole season, so that the Avatar is the master of all four elements. He can earthbend, waterbend, firebend, and airbend, right? He's the only guy who can do it. And he's been like sleeping for 100 years, and the Fire Nation has taken over. And the whole season is his like rise to fight the Fire Lord. And his whole thing, because he's an air nomad, is he like doesn't want to kill the guy, and he doesn't know how to reckon with this. Because like if he doesn't, then the whole world is going to be destroyed. And there's a scene at the very end when he's in this huge battle with the Fire Lord, where he like surrounds himself with a bunch of rock and he just meditates, and he's like, he goes to some spiritual world, but eventually gets the answer, and he takes the Fire Lord's bending away, which like is a super challenging thing to be able to do, right? And the reason why I bring this up is because I feel like that is a perfect example of like what we're talking about. Like Jen and Isabel, you kind of have this more you guys are more well versed, and I think from your experience with like the holistic sort of like from an outside spiritual, subconscious, mental state realm. And I feel like Eric, Taryn, and myself, and maybe even Ethan, we're kind of like just dog our way through it. That's kind of been our life, right? And I think that both things exist, and defend your wellness. If we can just sort of put the earth around us and sit down and meditate, like everybody's solution is going to look a little bit different. And I think that having these varied perspectives is going to be a super productive way to talk about this.
I totally agree. So, okay, let's start diving into that a little bit. When we're talking about someone, let's take some of those words out of there. When we're just talking about someone being well and successful and effective in their lives, what does that take? Like, what does a person need to do in order to make those things happen in their lives? I can pick someone. Yeah, there. Okay, let's hear it.
Well, I mean,
yeah,
what I need is going to be completely different from what you need is going to be completely different from Mary, who's walking in the gym, right? Like, that is such a broad question.
Okay, so how do you figure it out? Let's start there. Like, when you're working with somebody, all of us on this panel work with other people to help figure this stuff out for themselves. So, Taryn, where do you start when you're okay? Mary walks up to you and you don't know her from Adam. Where do you start with how to help her with these types of issues?
You know what? I think people stay way too superficial in this conversation, and maybe that's a little bit fear-based out of their own reservations. You know, there's a million different things you could say for why, but the more deeper you can dig into those questions, and if that, on the other hand, if that person is willing to run along that run with you, because I think that's also part of it. You got two strangers sitting across the table from one another. That's when you're truly going to get into whatever it is that they need from that, you know? And I think that's a hesitation, is that most conversations don't get the opportunity to go that far, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Other people have thoughts on where to start with somebody when they're trying to figure some of this stuff out?
So the question is, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
The question is, how do you know when someone is well? Was that the root of the question?
Well, really, my original question was, like, where do you start with somebody when they're trying to work on their wellness and their success of being effective? And then, you know, it's posed that you might need to take different approaches depending on the person. And so with all of us being in a helping role of some sort, I'm just kind of curious, where do you guys start? Do you guys have a methodology? Do you have some tactics to where you start to kind of like help people to figure this out?
Yeah, so I like to check in with people emotionally, physical, spiritually, financially, all these big pillars of health. And my questions really start there. You know, how are we doing in these areas? Especially, this would be the approach with a client, right? Not necessarily with a stranger I just met. Although you could, why not give it a whirl? By asking, you know, how are these areas of your life, and are they where you want them to be? Because yes, this is a broad question, and maybe the way some person's financial or romantic life looks is not how someone else wants theirs to look, right? So it's listening, hey, what's going on here, and are you happy with it? And I had a client like that today who did not come in for, you know, like tobacco use, but there's this massive history of it on her intake form. And I just said, hey, are you happy with these habits? Is this where you want them to be? She said, yeah, this is, I feel great about that right now. Here's what I want to work on. Excellent. You know, if that's where you want to be, we're not going to touch it right now. So it's just really asking questions and getting curious about where people are at and if they're happy with the level they're operating at.
Awesome. Eric, you were about to jump in. Do you have some thoughts?
Yeah, you know, when I reflect on like my personal experiences, something I think about a lot is, or just when I work with a new client, or I think about kind of where the person came from. So I think about their context. And I think for me, a long time, like when I first got into fitness and trying to even advocate for myself, you kind of do it without this context of who you are, right? So that's why everybody's like, oh, I'm just going to latch onto this diet, or I'm going to do 75 hard, or I'm going to do this next thing, because those are all things that make sense. A plus B equals C. If I can just do this, I'm going to be different, right? But sometimes I think about like why, in terms of why it might have been hard for me to, using the word defend myself, was like I come from like an Asian background, right? So from a value standpoint, one example is in my culture, or like how I grew up, we focus on collectivism. So it's not really about yourself. Like life is not really about you. It's about what it's about your community, all the family. Like filial piety is huge. You guys know what filial piety is, and like respect for elders. So those things kind of take precedence over yourself. So you kind of do what makes most sense for the family. So you don't really inconvenience your family. You don't really, and it kind of creates a culture where, well, it's really not about you. And you know what? It's kind of selfish to advocate for yourself. So I spent 2-3 decades battling that context in my life, and it took years to really understand, like, okay, well, what is it? How is it actually selfless for me to take care of myself? If I don't do this for myself, then how is that going to affect my family? Right? It's kind of like a reverse Uno card, but that's kind of like that's kind of what I think of when I think of the person. Like when I take into account who the person is, I think about, like, well, what are some things that maybe affect why you are the way that you are?
Yeah, I think that's huge. How we developed as a young person in the culture and our families and things like that largely shape how we act as adults. And so I think that was really, really poignant for you to bring that up, Eric. Jen, what do you think? Where do you start with somebody who's trying to figure these things out for themselves?
Yeah, I mean, people will come to me with specific things they want to work on as well. And what I really want people to do first is notice what's happening in your body. Notice especially what the motivation is. I mean, right in this container, we're talking a lot about fitness goals. So is there, for example, a desire to be accepted that's kind of like driving some of that? Is how I look, is that mattering in some way that ultimately feels like I'm trying to fix this feeling that I don't belong? If I do this, I'll finally get X, right? And when that is impossible, noticing that and trying to like help around that is kind of how I get to where do we want to be?
Yeah.
Do we want to be driving? Do we want to be doing our fitness goals because it's fun or because it makes us healthy? Or we want to be the best that we can. That's great. But if we're doing it for something like, I'm finally going to be okay, I'm finally going to be good enough, I'm finally going to be accepted, like that's the kind of thing we're looking for with anything, just fitness.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of what I've been thinking. The reason when I'm coaching everyone, if someone comes to me and strictly wants, strength performance programming from me, right? Like I can do that. And I have done that, and I'm really good at that. But I still start with something so much bigger than that. And I'm not saying I'm an expert at all, but where I start with is, so what? For what reason? To what end? And so I go super deep and high level with people, and I say, do you know what your purpose in life is? Like, if I asked you what your purpose was, why are you here? And what are you supposed to be doing in this life that you've got? I want to know that first, because how I design your programming, how I lead you to in a lot of other ways, depends on why do you think you're here? What is it that you think you're supposed to be using this body for, and your fitness for, and your health for? Because it's so much easier for me to kind of get people bought into, or it helps me to design and guide a process for that person when I kind of know where they see themselves going. So that's, I mean, I love, and everybody's, and it sounds like all of you all have some form of inquiry that kind of gets, you want to learn some things about the person to help them figure it out. And I do know that anyone who's going to be listening to this recording and who may jump in on the audience and whatnot, they're all different people with different perspectives and different wants and needs. And so it's going to be, there's a lot of ways that we can take this conversation. So what are your all's thoughts on, what are you guys seeing out there in your daily work of what is blocking people? I mean, we can take, you can say health, you can say, Taryn, you're a business coach. We all have different things that we help people to achieve. But what are you all seeing as the trends that tends to be blocking people from achieving those things?
Yeah, I mean, my obvious places people come from, they just have, their priorities are different. Their priority stack puts their health and fitness a little bit lower down on the stack, which, obviously we all know, and we've already kind of covered this, that like if you don't have yourself, none of the rest of the stuff matters. Everything else on that list is replaceable except your health. But I mean, that's the most obvious one, is that the people in my world are just, their priority stack is just a little bit well, I don't want to say malaligned, because it's a very individual thing and how they choose to do that. But just how we mesh this conversation, you know, it's not the number one thing on their list, right? And I know that I've been through that too myself. And I know that you guys also too have had swings where you're focusing on your business, or there's stuff going on in your family and that takes precedence, and so on and so forth. And maybe your health and your fitness and wellness and all that just falls a little bit down on the ladder. And until most times you get to a place where you're just like, this isn't working anymore, and the deck has to be reshuffled, you know? So.
Yeah, and I think that's the point too, is because they came to you for some reason, for some sort of help, right? And so they're kind of realizing that the way I've been doing things hasn't, you know, this prioritization hasn't been working for me. I need to do something different. You know, other things that anyone else is seeing around, like blockages with preventing people from getting what they want out of life and with their goals?
I think there's so much competing information that is available to us that is just kind of bullshit. Am I allowed to curse on here?
Yeah, bring it.
Okay. There's so much competing information, I think, that is bullshit. And, you know, again, to touch on, there's 1,000 ways to get in shape. And the barrier to entry is so much lower than people think. And this even touches on your previous question about, like, the way we start with people. And, like, everybody else in here, I sort of follow a pretty basic questionnaire to get a general sense of what, like, a person, their life looks like, what it is they want to accomplish, how much time commitment they have for this thing. But I usually always wrap that conversation up with this idea that, hey, whether you sign up to the gym today here or not, like, I want you to know that the way that you're going to do this is you need to find a space that allows you to create the systems that will eventually work. And that's going to look a lot different for everybody, like we've talked about, right? But I think that at a fundamental level, what people battle is they haven't tried enough iterations of whatever habits or disciplined focused thing is that will get them the thing that they want. And, like, I know Isabel and Jen probably have alluded to this too. I think a lot of times people, they don't actually want the things that they want. They want the feelings associated with the things that they want, right? Which is like security with themselves, confidence with themselves, fulfillment with what they're doing in their life. And I'm kind of like in the middle, because I know that that is true, but I also think that for people who have spent their whole life kind of putting themselves last, I think about moms a lot. Like, I talk to so many moms that have, like, given their whole life to their kids, and then they come in there in their 50s and they're like, I've just never done anything for me, and this is like my first time that I'm ever going to try to do this. Like, that's a super powerful reason why to do something. And I think just making them see that, hey, this is going to be like a long game thing where I know you think you want these things, but, like, over time you're going to see that what you're really searching for is the feelings associated with what we're trying to accomplish. And so, again, I know that's kind of like a gray area answer, but I think that it's true. Like, nobody really knows what they're doing to a certain degree at certain levels. But I think, you know, the kinds of spaces that we all provide people are productive, and they're means to change, and they're means to feel good about yourself and what you're doing, and improve your health physically, mentally, spiritually, etc.
Yeah, I would say when I work with my clients in blocks, a lot of it is fear and limiting beliefs. It's something they picked up along the way, you know, some trauma that they took as truth, you know, I'm not good enough, or I can't do it, or, you know, how could that be me, or fear of success, fear of failure. I mean, it's things like that that usually stem from childhood a lot of the time, sometimes adulthood, of course, and but it's a lot of fear. I almost every client who has a block, there's some root of fear some way.
For mine, it's really similar. I'll just add, sometimes I think of it as like self-actualization is a little bit missing. And this isn't mine, but I like to kind of describe the world as like my business, other people's business, God's business, whatever you want to call that, the universe, even that category being like the weather. And we're often really caught up in other people's business, like what people think or what people are doing, or, as opposed to ours. And that's really where we can shine and, step into what we want by staying in that lane.
I think that, everybody has mentioned something along the lines that I think is like really important for our audience to pay attention to, is that most of the time when we think about our priorities, or we think about what we should be doing with our effort and our energy and all that different stuff, if we're being honest with ourselves, I bet you over half of it is because we think somebody else wants us to be doing this thing. We're either we feel obligated to do it, or someone asked us to do it. They actually asked us, but sometimes they didn't even ask us. We just think that this is what we need to be doing, and so that's the thing that we do. And one of the ways to get everything that you want out of your life is to have the conversation with the most important people in your life, and to have a bit of a compromise and say, hey, this is what I need, what are you looking for, and just to get really clear and to kind of set the rules of the game, because most of the time we're operating under false beliefs and inaccurate information.
So many people are afraid to have that conversation, though.
Oh, it's so hard. Yeah. Tell me more about that.
Well, there will be times in the same conversation, where you're trying to dig in to figure out like why they're there, what they need to do. Just bringing up the idea that your spouse or someone in your family in the same household could be the person who is kind of like really standing in the way from the thing that is, going to help you get success for their own reasons, whatever that might be. And just to say, listen, like, let's sit down, let's have a conversation with this person, to even like put their wants and needs out on the table in front of them and say that like, this is really important and I want this. Why can't you, or how can you be supportive of that, is like a really tough conversation, I would say, for most of the people that we talk to. And I mean, there's people have their own way of dealing with things, and that conversation can go sideways really quick if the other person on the other end of the line is not emotionally mature enough to have that conversation, or aware enough, and X, Y, and Z. And so, I could understand the fear for that person, but like at some point, that is part of the process that box needs to be checked to take your next series of steps forward,
Yeah, I'm in that category of people where like I have struggled a lot in my life to have conversations with people because I'm afraid they're going to abandon me. I'm afraid that they won't be my loved one anymore if I tell them how it is or what I'm going to do, and if it's in conflict. But I'll tell you, in actuality, every time I've actually developed the courage to have the conversation, it's always gone really beautifully. Almost always. They're like, I love you. Yeah, go do it. I didn't want you to not do this thing or whatever. It was just this thing that I created in my mind. But actually having the conversation, how does the saying go? We suffer more in our imagination than we do in reality. I've experienced that a lot personally. Eric, you were about to jump in on this?
Oh no, I just when you were saying that, something I thought about was just the way that we think about people. I think someone said this. Maybe it was Sean Ryder. He said, people aren't thinking about you nearly as much as you are spending time thinking about them thinking about you.
Yeah, it's
and
crazy.
It was an example where like he said something once, and I was like, "Oh, okay, you think that, huh?" And he looked at me face like straight in the eye on the call, and he goes, "Hey, bro, I just want you to know, as soon as this call is over, I'm sorry, man. I'm not thinking about you. Like my opinion only matters if you want it. But don't let me live rent free in your head." And I'm just like, dude, like, because that hit me. Because I was like, this guy's like someone that's my mentor, and he's saying that. He's like, dude, like, don't give me any more weight. Don't give this conversation any more weight than it needs to, right? But like, I think it's so easy for us to just like care about everything that everybody says. or want to appease people and make sure that we're, and then who gets sacrificed in the process.
I think the default setting of living in a society that is large, like I know this isn't the case for a lot of places in the world, but like one of the burdens of living in such a you can do anything you want world is that like there's like a burden of choice where there's so many options before you, what do I pick? And it often leads to, I think, like inaction, but what that couples with eventually is like we all tell these wild stories in our head about our existence as we go through stuff, like and everybody's different. Like I have like this thing where if I think about doing something, I'm like, this is going to be a sick story that I'm going to be able to tell one day. But then I'm like, do I actually even want to do that, or do I just want to like tell a cool story about it? And so there's always this interplay, I think. And I would imagine that all of us on this call are probably pretty introspective people, and so we probably do this a lot, which is tell the stories. But I think a lot of times it's just helpful to have somebody to step in and say like, hey, this story, like you're creating it, and you have the ability to take a step back from it, reassess where you are in your life, the resources that you have available to you, you can change the story and you can rewrite it to be something completely new where you don't put so much stock in the stuff that we're talking about, what people say to you, what people think, what you think people think about you, all those things.
Joel, I love this. I actually it's interesting that you say that, because I'm listening to you and I'm like, you know what? I used to sit in my office, and when I asked for referrals or I asked for little simple whiteboard pictures just to celebrate their wins, and they knew it was going up on social media, and the people that would get reluctant about giving that to me, that permission to me to use that for that purpose, my to get them to give me that permission was always like, this story is going to be amazing. We're going to, showcase all your results, and somebody sitting on their couch is going to read this story, and you're going to be the catalyst that helps this person go and take the next step to get all this. But like, as I'm listening to you, I was like, I really should have gave that perspective to the person that might have been struggling in our initial meeting, to like make the next step and make the commitment. That's super interesting. I like that.
Okay, so let's start getting into the to some of this, to the tactical side of this, because I think we've kind of understood. I think we understood that oftentimes people take action that they wanted other people wanted them to take, or they set other priorities for all various different reasons, and then they get down the road and they're a little resentful. They realize, oh, this isn't what I wanted. I'm not, they get a little resentful, maybe they're a little bitter, and they come to us and they're looking for some tactical help on how to kind of push through. So how do you guys recommend that people set boundary or reprioritize or set boundaries with, we can say other people, places, and things, because it might be their workplace or it might be their spouse or whatever. But, what are some really like helpful and tactical ways to set boundaries?
I think having the conversation of like gauging, a good example of this, some people who work like high stress jobs, for example, feel, and a lot of people feel this way just because of the connectivity that we all have with our technology and social media and cell phones and stuff. Like it is hard to unplug. There are more resources that are vying for our attention, and it is very easy to stay plugged in like 50% of your attention. Like I'm eating dinner with my significant other or whatever, and like I'm also thinking I got to check my phone because like maybe there's a work thing, right? And that like wasn't a problem, 50 years ago or whatever. Like it was like you show up for work and then you go home and then you can like plug off. And I think that idea, like separation, work-life balance, is actually really easy to do still, but people just don't feel that way. And I think gauging when you're working with somebody or you're talking with somebody, gauging their perspective on that. Like, do you feel like you are always plugged into your work? If yes, what's the reason behind that? Like, for example, I always tell people I haven't had my notifications on my phone in like 6 years. Like my phone does not vibrate. The only time it vibrates is when people call me. And I've probably missed one important thing that I should not have missed in the whole time that I've done that. Like, it's really not that big of a deal that I don't have my phone, or I leave it in the other room, or whatever. And I think that is a good example of this. I would say that the technology and the connectedness we have, how amazing of a tool that it is. I think there's a big chunk of people that feel like they can't pull back from that, and it's one of the big limiters for people creating some boundaries in their work or their professional life to work on some of the things that they have going on personally.
So am I
Well,
summarizing
you
this
show me
correctly in saying, just to wrap that one up, Joel, it's just, and for the audience who's going to hear this, right? Am I summarizing this correctly that you say that like you've kind of got to create some a time and a place for these activities that matter to you, and then when you're in that time and place, you're not doing the other things? Am I hearing that right?
Correct. And I think that like creating the time and place is one thing, but I guess my point was more addressing, I think 90+% of people feel like it's near impossible to create space, and I'm wanting to say it's not. Like, you can do it, and I've helped people do it. I help people do it all the time. I've done it myself, and that, I think, fundamentally is where the starting point needs to be, is figuring out, based off of the myriad of things you have going on in your life, where, how, and what that space is going to look like.
Yeah, and just to support that before we jump in, because I think someone else is going to, just to support that, I love it when I'm talking to somebody and they tell me, or even someone who works for me, they tell me, no, I can't do that because I've committed to this. And I'm like, good for you. Like, I love that you're advocating for this other time that you've supported. So I think, people who are really caring and supportive are going to really appreciate when you draw those lines and those boundaries. Okay, what other kind of tactical advice or support do we have for people to kind of set boundaries in their lives?
Well, Ethan, I think the cool thing about what you just said too is you're trusting people's yeses more when you know they can say no. You know what I mean? Like, when people can give you a healthy no, you're like, okay, when you say yes, I know you really mean it, and it's not going to be something that you're upset or overwhelmed or whatever about later, or resentful, because I know you can say no when you need to, and that feels very safe to people. And when I start to work with people and boundaries in general, I say, you realize that when you set boundaries, it feels safe to you and it feels safe to other people because everyone understands what's going on. The playing field, we get it. We know the yeses, we know the nos. This is safe. And even if your boundaries are different than someone else's, you know where theirs are. And I think that that's something that sometimes gets overlooked. So that's a really easy way to kind of start the topic of boundaries. And another thing is to understand that people's boundaries might be different, and what matters is how you feel about the boundaries you have. Some people's work-life balance might be different, and when I have clients who are working 40, 50, 60, 70 hours a week, I would never work 70 hours a week. That's not my thing. But when I ask them, how do you feel? Does this feel good? How is everything else balanced in your life? And they're feeling good about it. Great. So whatever your boundary is, how are you feeling about it? And then if it looks different from someone else's, that's fine. So just understanding that we need to set the boundaries that feel good for you individually, and don't compare it to other people's, because it's going to be different.
Yeah, that judgment piece, judging ourselves and judging others is like is a big part of this, right? I mean, I think that has to, because Eric kind of spoke about this, about how his family was growing up. Kind of, if I go away from this, I'm going to be judged, or am I going to feel differently, even with my own values? So I think that is a really important part of this conversation.
I'd say it's important. Sorry, to remember that boundaries are something that we do. I hear a lot of people say, "Oh, this person crossed my boundary," but I don't think that's correct. An example would be, Mom, if you raise your voice when we're on the phone, I'm going to hang up. If Mom raises her voice, that's her business. If you don't hang up, that's you crossing your boundary. The boundary is the consequence that you're going to carry out if someone, crosses the boundary.
That is huge, because I think, and that's kind of what I was saying earlier. I'm my own worst enemy. It's not that, like, okay, if someone crosses my boundary, like, no big deal. The problem was that I didn't hold the standard. I didn't, hold them accountable for stick up for myself, in some way or another. So
I think
I
it's
think that's
keeping
a
your
really
word.
part of this. Yeah.
It's like keeping your word to yourself,
Exactly. Yeah.
like and that's a skill, and it's practice, and if you don't do it, you'll get worse at it. And so I think people like use the archetype. This is a super easy example for this, of like the mom that has dedicated her life to her children and then is like in her 50s and wants to do something about her health. It's like, I'm not saying she didn't keep her word to herself by not prioritizing that earlier. Like she probably did in some way to raise her kids or whatever, but like it's the longer you go not prioritizing yourself and setting the boundary, the harder it is then to establish it. And like obviously it still can be done, and it's totally worth it for it to be done, but it's a thing. I think reframing it that way, like, hey, we got to practice this. Like, you're not going to get it right the first time or the second time probably, or the third time even, but like you're going to slowly incrementally get better at like saying no and meaning no, and keeping your word that you're going to keep this time commitment to yourself, that you're going to do this thing.
That's where I was going. I was going to tag on your initial statement that you made, Joel, because I feel like sometimes when it goes wrong, sometimes the boundary or the no was just maybe a little bit too large to start off with for most people, right? Like if you asked me to turn my notifications off for 6 years, I would have to start with, all right, let's just take like a night off of Facebook, and that would be a big enough leap for me, right? So I think those incremental steps are just so important to building the confidence, so that when the no becomes very important, it's a little bit easier. You're practiced, you've had that time to run through mini versions of no that lead up to whatever the main boundary is. We had a client who, in one of our goal sessions, like that was her goal, was everybody asks me to do things and I just say yes because I don't know how to say no. And it was like the next immediate dinner at her in-laws, her task was to say no because that made her super unhappy and didn't want to go over there, didn't enjoy being over there. And that just like terrified her. So it was like, let's just take smaller no's. Like when they ask you to volunteer for lunch at your kid's school, say no, so that you just get used to saying no if you don't want to do those things. So the in-laws dinner doesn't feel like Mount Everest to climb up of.
That's so
And it was
good.
cool watching her like progress through that of just being able to say no more regularly.
Yeah, it's a skill.
That's good.
It's 100% a skill. And so this kind of leads me into one of the other things that I wanted to bring into the conversation is, does the word discipline have a place in this conversation of defending your wellness or setting boundaries or anything like that? Is there a place for discipline in this conversation?
I think the term discipline is becoming like a buzzword in the self-improvement world, like 100%. And ultimately, what does discipline mean? I think that discipline is, it's basically, it's like a step up above commitment. It's like the most disciplined people not only are committed to the thing, but they're always like, empty the tank is like a very bro science way to put what I'm talking about. It's whatever you have, like for example, say like you can't give 100% in the gym because you're like nursing an injury. That doesn't mean like you're failing, right? That was like the best you had on a day, right? So like a good example of this is, I would say that at times I am more committed than I am disciplined personally. Like I always show up, but I mail it in a lot of the time. Like I'm just whatever, and I think disciplined people show up, they give their best, they empty the tank, whatever that looks like on the day. And so yes, discipline I think has a place, but I actually am of the mind that commitment is a more important trait, because people have a hard time when people mess up. They're like, I fucked this up and I just, I'm going to have to take a break for a while. I'll get back on track eventually. And I think if you are more committed to being committed to the thing, there's room for that. There's like you are going to mess up. I think everybody knows that. And usually the people that stick to things long term just have kind of accepted this as a reality, and they do their best nonetheless, right? They keep showing up. They're committed to the thing, even if you are mailing it. I think this is like the something is better than nothing cliche phrase, right? And I think that commitment as an idea is probably a little bit more important than discipline.
Awesome. Other thoughts about this? I lobbed it in there for a reason, so I'm just kind of curious about what you guys are gonna say about it.
Yeah, I mean, Joel, I love where you took this, and I think that's awesome. I think that if you tried to set a boundary, I don't love the word try, but you did better today than you did yesterday in setting a boundary, then that's awesome. Like you did 100% for the day. Expecting perfection from the conversation of, okay, let's implement better boundaries, to when you have the chance to, set them is not realistic. So just being careful of being like, oh no, like I failed. I didn't hang up the phone when my mom raised her voice today, or, whatever it is. No. But if you were able to do even 5% better than you did yesterday, that is the discipline, that is the commitment, and it's going to be a process. So just having grace for getting it better every single day.
I think discipline also speaks to. I feel like discipline is more. I see it more as like a practice, whereas commitment is more of an identity. If that makes sense. Does that make sense?
Tell me more about it. Tell me what you mean.
So the way I look at it is like, okay, discipline is like what Joel mentioned. It's like your daily actions. It's your process. It's like, like I have one of those like habit trackers, not here, but somewhere in the room. It's like, oh, I do this every day. This is my discipline, right? And I feel like your commitment to the things that matter to you are more about your core beliefs about who you are, your internal motivations, like the perspective that you hold long term and the things that you care about. And maybe you're not perfect every day in doing your daily disciplines, but it doesn't change your identity, whereas you can be off on your daily disciplines occasionally. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that makes actually a lot of sense, and that's a better way to, I think, put what I was trying to say. Like, I'm committed to my health and fitness, like point blank. But if I walk outside and I get hit by a moped and my leg shatters or something, unfortunately, then, it's going to look a lot different. And long term, I'm very committed to my health and fitness. But like to use Isabel's, like giving yourself grace, I have to accept that at a certain point in time, right, that these next couple months where I'm really rehabbing my leg, I might lose my six pack or whatever. It's I like that a lot, Eric. Like, I'm committed to my health and fitness, even though sometimes those daily disciplined acts look a little bit different.
And I think like one of the things that kind of comes from that conversation too is like usually discipline is associated with something that has an outcome or like an end goal, so that it's like a black or white, yes or no. As where commitment is just, it's an ongoing thing that is forever or whatever longer period of time. So when you put it from something of the perspective of setting boundaries and carrying through on those boundaries, like the boundary thing is not a black or white thing. It's something that is situational. Like there could be a super stressful day you deal with, and when the in-laws want you to come for supper, you might not be well equipped on that day to say no, versus it's a better day and you got some sleep and you exercise and whatever else. And so saying no feels really easy on that day. So I think that, the outcome is more associated with discipline versus like, this is just an ongoing thing that you are committed to practicing and putting reps in the bucket, right? Every rep matters, whether it's a complete rep or a partial rep. A rep is still a rep, and that's practice. And so being committed to that process, just like Joel's trying to say. Yeah, for sure.
Can I share a little story of something that recently happened? That just Taryn, what you shared just made me think of this. It like doesn't really have to do with health and fitness, but it's kind of analogous in some kind of way, I think. So I was in Idaho like 3 weeks ago, and I went to this like offsite. You fly into Boise. So for me, being from LA, flying into Boise already was like, dude, where am I? And then we drove another 3 hours into like nowhere, this town called Atlanta, population of 30. Right? And there's a whole story. I swear, I'm not making this up right now. Population of 30. The power comes from the river. Like the way that the river flows down somehow creates energy. I don't know how it works, but anyway, like that's how the town is powered. And I had no cell service for 3 days. So like by design, I could not even I couldn't check anything. I couldn't talk about having no notifications. That was the first time I had no notifications since I got a phone when I was like 17 years old. So, literally like 20 years of this. And anyway, long story short, I come back from the street, like this trip, and wow, it's life changing, right? Like digital detoxed, connected with nature. I literally, I would mark it as a top 3 experience in the last decade for me, right? And the irony is, so to analogy to what you were saying, Taryn, is I have a commitment to be a good father. Like I have 3 children, 3 young children right now. We're in a really tough season of grinding, and we're in the trenches right now. 7, 5, and 2, right? So we're just in the trenches. Like my daughter, I slept terrible last night. My back's kind of tight. You know, just being a young parent, right? And I have a commitment to being a good parent. The irony is, I came back from Idaho, and it's been 2.5 weeks. I legit have not yelled at my kids since I got back. I yell at my kids like every day, right? And I was thinking about that, and I was like, so the thought that I had was like, oh shit, like, man, if I yell at my kids, am I now a bad father again? Right? But that's just not the reality. Like, I'm gonna yell at my kids again. Like, I'm a human being. But the commitment for me is like, I want to be a good father, and be, reducing the amount of my screaming at my kids would probably make me a better father long term. But it's like, that's like the discipline, and the commitment to me being a good dad is the commitment, and they can be mutually exclusive, if that makes sense. Oh, that kind of was tied in a little bit, but that's what you made me think of, Sharon. So
Yeah, and I think I mean, there's so much tied into what you said, is because you're already, I think a lot of times people have, I started going this direction, right? I created some momentum going this way, and then they have a hard time. Then if they pivot, then it's hard for people to change directions or to do different things or to be okay with being a different way. And I talk to a lot of people I work with is, we create identities around who we are. Like you're saying, I want to be a good father. And then in your mind, it's like this identity as a good father who maybe now doesn't yell at my kids, and it's like, well, you're creating this identity around this thing, and then you're worried about being a different way than that if you need to be, or if it's important to you, So, so I do think that kind of works itself into the conversation. So
I've had a recent idea, and just so everybody on here knows, Ethan and I had a virtual coffee earlier today. It was really cute, and I was sharing this idea with him. It's that there's a pretty high cost associated with growth. And I think that I didn't realize this until like a couple weeks ago. And the cost is that if I now want to become better, whatever metric I'm using, it is kind of silly for me to believe that when I get there, I'm going to want the same things as I want right now. And I think Jen and Isabel, you guys will kind of respect this opinion a lot, because like, literally name any successful person where they're like, I got to the top of the mountain and then I was like, why the hell do I feel exactly the same, right? It's because there's other underlying things that need to probably be addressed and are probably more important. And I think we all probably have a story associated with that at some level. Like, you achieve a thing and then you're not quite happy with what it is. And I think it's 2 things. Number one, it's that you probably just didn't realize that the thing you wanted wasn't actually the thing you wanted. But I also think there's a bit of interplay with what we're talking about, where it's the person that you've become because of the experiences that you just went through have made you a new person, and it has made your priorities shift, and it has shown you, it's like the allegory of the cave. Like, you now see that there's a new type of world that exists. Like Eric, for example, you saw the value of how going into nature and unplugging from your phone has made you a more kind, gentle, calm person. And it was probably like a small change for you because you're invested in like your wellness and how you interact with your kids. But like, there's a lot of people who have like an objectively horrible interfacing with the world, like that maybe they're not great people and they're like kind of nasty to other people, and then they'll go through a certain life-changing experience like you. And it's basically, I think the self-improvement world would call it a new standard, but I don't really like that language. I think it's a little bit more holistic than that. Like, you are a new person, and you've recognized now that like you are capable of being better and doing more. And so I think it's important if somebody's at like square one to tell them that, like, hey, you know, like long term you're committed to this thing, but like you will be made anew by going through this. You will be a different person that like is going to care about so much more stuff than just like this surface level thing that we're shooting for right now.
Joel, first of all, I totally respect you no matter what you say, but I also totally agree with you. So thanks for the perspective. And when you talk about cost of, improving and becoming someone new, what came to mind for me is what are the false rewards of not improving, right? So let's say a lot of the time we're not going to make a change. So investing in a program or a business, you need 10 grand. Let's use that. So the false reward of not doing it is you have that 10 grand, right? Great, I'm safe. I have that cushion in my bank account. Awesome. But you don't get to go on to the next step, the next level, whatever it is that you're trying to get to, insert the language you want. Same thing, making a change emotionally, right? What is the false reward of not changing emotionally, not becoming a less volatile or angry person? Ooh, safety. I don't have to look at what's really going on. I don't have to do that deep feeling work, right? But at the end of the day, you still have that habit that you're not happy with. So the cost of changing might be high, but what's the cost of staying the same? And what's the false reward that you're looking at in order to convince you or make you feel better about not moving forward on a day when you're not having that confidence? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do think I agree with that, and I think that there's a cost benefit analysis in all these. There's a cost and a benefit to changing, and there's a cost and benefit to not changing, and we have to acknowledge that people are weighing that stuff out and maybe trying to make that evaluation for themselves. So I would love to. We're getting close to the time, and Eric, I think you were saying that you might have to bounce out right around now. So I don't know. Are we holding you up?
Yeah, I got you.
Okay. Yeah.
Boundaries.
Get out here. Okay.
He's got boundaries.
Yeah, boundaries. Yeah. So
This was all planned.
yeah. Well, I'm gonna bring this a little bit to the conclusion now, and I think that there's a lot of people who have some fear and anxiety. I mean, we talked about this earlier in the conversation about like what is blocking people, and the word fear was thrown out, and there was some other parts of this. And I would love to, give us some advice to some people who are listening to this. They want to make a change. They're trying to create they're trying to make a change in their life, and they're scared and have some anxiety around this. What's some advice that you guys might have for people to deal with that fear and anxiety so that they can move forward?
My first is compassion for yourself, because whenever that fear is there, that's usually like a young part of us. If you think of like an inner child, and like whether it's anxiety or looking at that cost of I gotta feel the feelings or make this investment or whatever it is, like just we can notice. Imagine that there's some actual child, and if it's hard, that's an easier way to kind of start to access some compassion and then bring it closer. And then you also get the little separation of, if you want to say higher self, not that there's a lower self, but like higher self, inner child, and that little bit of separation from the fear with compassion is really empowering.
Yeah. So if I'm hearing you right, just like acknowledge that there's a part of you that's really scared and afraid, and showing and like almost having a conversation with that part of you, and you're saying like, I get it, I understand, like I've been there because I am there, and yeah. Okay, I love that. Taryn, what kind of advice do you have for somebody who's having anxiety and fear about setting a boundary, rejecting people pleasing, anything around what we've been talking about today?
I've got two things.
Okay.
The first, most obvious one is ask for help. Like, it's always easier to do something when you have somebody who has an objective perspective on what is going on, to help guide you through the steps, whatever those steps are, just to like remove your own nuances out of it and just follow the plan, right? And then the second part is make that plan really super simple with the least amount of friction points at the beginning. You just want it easy to get started so you could get small win after small win after small win, so that the wins at the end get easier to get there because you're just small stair steps along the way, right? So ask for help, small wins.
I love that. Simple. You're using the KISS method. Keep it simple, and those things make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Isabel, if I came to you with fear and anxiety about trying to make a change in my life, what kind of advice would you give me?
Number one, breathe. Seriously. And tell me about all of the thoughts in your head. You know, what are the emotions? So we know fear is there, but what else is there? Excitement? Is it joy? Is it whatever it is? Let's listen to all of those voices, and I want to hear what's going on in all parts. And then we can kind of unpack the ones that you feel like are holding her back, you know, the fear, the anxiety, and then getting into your body and seeing where you're holding that so that we can let that go and get you in a clear headspace so that you can make the decision and you feel level-headed going into whatever change you need to make or want to make.
I love that. For whatever reason, what you just said reminded me of a saying that's something like, if you weren't afraid, what would you do? You know, and something, you know, like it's acknowledging the fear, but also what else is in there? And if we took the fear out, how would you act? You know,
yeah, I think it's, if you knew you wouldn't fail, what would you do?
Oh, there it is. Yeah. There it is. I butcher these quotes all the time.
No, also without fear, what would you do? That was good.
Right. Yeah. Cool. Thank you for that. Joel, what is your, I'm coming to you with some anxiety and fear about making this change. What advice are you going to give me?
I also have two. I think that the same thing Terrence said with like finding people to support you. Like, I would argue that nobody's ever done anything in their entire life by themselves. Like, we're social creatures. And even if like, even the people who are like, I built this business by myself, I was working 16 hours a day. Like, you had people there to help you. And like, the story you tell yourself is that you did it by yourself, but that's not true. Like, you had people, and like, you don't have to do anything alone. And the other thing that I would tell people is that it's not that big of a deal. Like, the changes that you make are likely going to be these like really small marginal things that are going to affect you long term over time. And I think that the action is not that big of a deal, and like, so don't make it a big deal, but the commitment to it is a big deal. Like, you are way more capable at doing hard stuff than you think you are, physically, mentally, emotionally. And I think that you deserve to do that, and you should do that. And that's, you know, that's just a fundamental belief I have. Like, as human beings, I think it's important to push yourself and test yourself and do good things, and, you know, follow your heart and gut more than your mind, because those are generally the things that are going to make you the happiest and most fulfilled.
Awesome. And Eric, I'm coming to you with I need some help. I've got fear and anxiety about making this change in my life. What kind of advice you got for me?
And I really like Joel's. I really like Terrence. And everyone's is so good. I think Terrence really stuck out to me, and I'm just going to add to that. I really struggle with this, and we have the same mental fitness coach that works this into my life right now. But I'm really bad at counting wins. Right, so when you start something, I think one of the biggest things is you just, you know, count your wins no matter how small they are. Really good example of this is, you know, this is kind of a lot of us are CrossFitters here. Do CrossFitters like some of the fittest people on earth, but then also have like the worst body dysmorphia, right? And I think for me, I often think I forget that I'm like on a scale of like fit to not fit. I'm like a pretty fit guy, but then I'm used to this perception of how I used to see myself when I was competitive, and it's like it eats me alive because I'm not that guy, right? And it's like it's all relative, and being just able to count like where you are and celebrating who you are today and doing things that you're doing is, I think, is really, really big. And then every step of when you pick up a new habit or a new skill is celebrating each little win along the way. The second thing, since we're all doing two, I would say decide what is worth doing. I'm gonna promote this book. I give this book away a lot, but it's called Hell Yeah or No: What's Worth Doing. And I think a lot of us, it's really hard to live by that mantra. But if you think about the things that we have to choose on a daily basis, a lot of us don't know really why we are doing what we are doing on a day-to-day basis. because we just say yes to everything. I think we had a whole segment on the importance of no and having boundaries. And I think just really, when you decide what is worth doing, it's either hell yeah or hell no. And I think we're able to challenge ourselves and see our lives through that lens. When we say hell yes to the things that we actually want to say hell yes to, then like you live a pretty good life for the most part. So those probably my two.
I love that part of it, and I think that no one asked me, but I'm going to go ahead and say what advice I would give.
You have to, bro. You're the host.
You've got to be. For me, it's really important to me to be locked into. This is kind of piggybacking on what you just said, Eric. It's like what is my purpose and what are my values, right? And if I'm acting in line with and I'm putting my efforts in line with like where I see my purpose and my values, who I am, I'm gonna make better decisions. And I think to like bring in a lot of what everyone said here was most of the time when I'm living in fear and anxiety, I'm either thinking about some sort of past situation that happened to me and somehow I'm applying it to this situation, which isn't the same situation, or I'm creating some sort of version of the future that I'm worried about that isn't actual reality either. But if I locked into this moment and I stood strong on what my purpose is and who I am, then I can make better decisions if I'm not kind of living in the past or the future. And so my advice would be, if you're living in anxiety and fear around some of these things, to what Dr. Isabel said, let's first breathe, let's get really present, let's get locked into the now, right now, and let's remember who the fuck we are. Right? I know who I am. I know what I'm about. And let me make that decision right now in this moment, not really worried about some sort of potential thing that might happen if I do this. So anyway, that's kind of my perspective on it. Were there things that some of you all wanted to talk about, you hoped I would ask you about, and that you wanted to bring into the conversation as, before we close it?
I think you had a really good mic drop moment there, Ethan, where you were like,
I should have just locked it down right there. And that's it. And we're out. No, I was kidding.
But I think that's important. And I don't think that we could reiterate the importance of that enough. I think that like we're all so different on this call. We have different mindsets and different perspectives and like the personality. I think it's so important to involve your personality in it. Like when you said, remember who the fuck you are, that is like you're a bit of like a, macho, like let's get after it kind of thing. And like, that's awesome. Is
that my masculine showing?
Yeah.
Isabel?
But like, that's you, right? And I'm like, I try to keep, I don't really get super emotionally high, but I also didn't get super emotionally low. And I'm like, I love martial arts and I try to be very like stoic about everything. And like, that's just my personality. And I think that the more you can sort of uncover that and let that bleed into the things that you're trying to accomplish and that's how you're going to figure out what you're going to say yes to and what you're going to say no to is figuring out who you are.
Yeah. Awesome. Were there other things that anybody wanted to talk about? Anybody want to bring something in?
Bro, this was good for me it was good for me, even though I'm on the panel. So
me too. Great. I learned so many things. It reminded me of so many things. So, well, it sounds like everybody said what they needed to say and brought in what they wanted to bring in. So let me just conclude it with gratitude. You all are amazing. I picked, you all came in and I picked you all because I knew what you're going to bring to the table. And I hope that the folks who listen to this got the golden nuggets. I'll be creating clips for people to kind of get all this. And of course, if you guys have more to add, please share. You guys can always share on your social media and tag, reference this episode and all that good stuff. But just thank you for being on the panel. I appreciate you all so much, and I love all the work you're doing. And just keep fighting the good fight.
Thanks, Ethan.
All right, well, have a good evening. We'll see y'all later.
Thank you. Thanks for hosting this. This was awesome.
Of course. We'll see you soon.